Dr. Heather Hudson is the new director for the Institute of Social and Economic Research. Dr. Hudson has been involved in Alaskan research since the 1970s, and she feels like she's coming back home to take this job. Dr. Hudson returns to Alaska with a strong international reputation and years of experience conducting research in northern climates. It's my privilege to introduce to you someone I'm proud to claim as a constituent, the director of ISER, Dr. Heather Hudson.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Is this working?
We're not sure.
Okay, thank you, because I somehow started losing my voice yesterday. Thank you, and we'd like to thank very much Senator Ellis and Representative Craig Johnson for inviting us, and also Northern Bank for supplying the wonderful food that is bringing you here. We thought, one of my colleagues said, well, Thai food, I hope they have green curry for St. Patrick's Day. So, we're really pleased to be here, and we hope to bring you up to date on what ISER's been up to and what we're thinking about for the future. And there's one particular reason why we're here this year and actually at this time. And it's because of you that we exist. In 1961, the legislature passed an act that actually founded ISER. And so we wanted to come during ISER's 50th anniversary to share with you what we've accomplished since we were founded and what we're thinking about doing next. My colleagues here are Scott Goldsmith, Diane Hirschberg, and Steve Colt, all of whom will be telling you about some of their areas of research. ISER's been, as I say, working on these topics for the past 50 years. We started ago, but we've added a lot of new activity, and you'll hear from my colleagues some specific information on three major themes we're working on: the economy, energy and the environment, and education, or 3 E's as we come to call them. But I'll give you a little background on some of ISER's other activities, because we're working in many areas, and then I'll turn it over to them to tell you about what they and their colleagues are working on and plan to work on. And then I'll tell you at the end a few things that we're also planning in addition to this briefing for our 50th anniversary year. One of the areas that we're working on, which is relatively new for ISER and which we're focusing on, is healthcare. And I will point out to you that we have brought many examples of our publications that are outside in the hall on the way to the free food, which you're welcome to pick up. If we refer to anything that you would like to know more about and isn't out there, we have a lot of material on our website, or you can send us an email and we can make it available. So one of the areas we've been working on is access to health care among the elderly and disadvantaged, and the problem of primary care access for Medicare patients. So that's a study that we did in the past year that was very well received, and we're developing and continuing with a variety of healthcare projects on access for older Alaskans, concerns about extended care facilities in rural Alaska, nurse practitioners, and other providers of healthcare. So we're developing a stream, and I think that's one of the areas that will be important to the state in the future as we try to come to grips with how we provide and pay for healthcare in Alaska. We've also done a lot of work on other policy issues that involve youth in Alaska, one of which is Kids Count, which is a study that we do annually as part of a nationwide study. Every year it comes out with data on what's happening with young people in Alaska. We have just come out with the latest copy. It is on the website, but all the legislators will be getting a hard copy. I have a few that are outside, but if you didn't get one today and you would like the hard copy, you will have one in the mail in the next couple of weeks to each office. The Anna Casey Foundation sponsors this. Our research is kind of, there's a lot of material in this report. I can say there's kind of good news and bad news. To do a very quick summary, on the one hand, we're doing very well in Alaska with infant mortality and keeping more children alive at a young age. We still have a serious problem of death rates among teenagers and adolescents, primarily from accidents and suicides. So this is something that's important to continue to work on. But there's a wealth of material in that report, and it is available online. We've also been working with Covenant House in Anchorage and doing other work looking at the problems that face young people in Alaska, and in this case what happens when they try to come to a shelter that provides the only opportunity for them in Alaska. If they're away from home, what problems are they facing, and how can Covenant House and others that are concerned about young Alaskans do a better job and understand that population. We've done research on the justice system, and something that I think is quite relevant given the discussion about new prisons, the cost of prisons, as well as purpose of prisons in Alaska. The study found that if there was some investment in treatment and other programs for prison inmates, not only would this help the inmates, but it actually would cut the cost of the incarceration for inmates. So we're now working on a follow-up study looking at the prison system and what Alaska can be doing to make it better serve the prisoners, as well as to help the state cut its costs and address the issues of incarceration within Alaska. We did, a few years ago, under the previous Lieutenant Governor, a study looking at the quality of Alaska's election system, in particular the security systems, the hardware and the software, and how to improve that security, and found actually that it did work quite well. We also have been working with Yupik people in the Bethel area to develop outreach on language assistance to deal with elections, and we've actually had some informal discussions with the new administration about some concerns and interests they have, and some further research on the integrity of the past elections. So that's another area that we plan to stay involved with, and which I think is important for Alaska's future, to make sure that the elections are run as well as possible. In conjunction with the Alaska Native Language Center at Fairbanks, we've updated the map that many of you probably have either seen in offices or schoolrooms or libraries, which has been around since the 70s, of native languages in Alaska. This map not only updates the data, but it adds new information with place names in both the indigenous names and modern names if they're different. But one of the most interesting things about it is the whole thing comes with GIS coordinates now. We will have the hard copy. We have some small ones up there. We are just getting the big ones printed. But we will have the whole thing online, so that if people are interested in combining that information with other information, demographics, where other services and facilities are in communities, they can just take this map and use it. That's the point of the exercise, to make it something living and dynamic that adds cultural information to other sources that researchers and policymakers might want to use. We're also, my field, as was briefly mentioned, is in rural communications, and we're developing research to contribute to some of the areas that are problems that are currently facing Alaska. One is, how do we extend broadband throughout the state and upgrade the facilities? There have been some federal stimulus projects that have been recently funded. How do we learn about how well they're working and how to get the most out of them for the beneficiaries of rural Alaska? Where are the gaps in broadband that are not being covered? And we plan to also coordinate with, there's state activity through the Federal Communications Commission, looking at reform of universal service, which is critical to the phone companies in the state and to the users of schools and libraries that receive subsidies of up to 90% of the cost of their connectivity for the internet. So those programs and what happens to them are critical, and we've been doing some work on that area. We are also looking at state and broadband activity, and how we can learn from the history of Alaska. As the Senator mentioned, I worked here long ago. I'd like to say I was a child at the time, but I was actually a grad student. But that was in the time when Alaska first made the commitment to putting communication in all permanent communities of 25 people or more. It's a terrific lesson to be learned. I think we're the only state that ever made a commitment like that with a particular cutoff. It's important to figure out, how did that happen? What have we learned? And as we go into the future of new technologies and broadband, what lessons are there that can help us make sure that the facilities in the rural areas are both upgraded but also remain affordable? We've been working on transportation. There have been studies that have built a database on public infrastructure and costs of replacing it, and also an analysis of energy requirements of Alaska's transportation systems. And we think in the future, we've been asked if we could do more work on transportation, public transportation options, So that's another area that we plan to stay involved with. An area that we have been developing is resource management. We are very happy this year to have funding from the Council of Alaska Producers for the first visiting professorship, and that's something we hope will continue. Our first visiting professor is Bob Leffler, who is well known in the land management and resource management field. He's both teaching and helping us to get a research program going in that area. We've also been doing research with funding from other sources on socioeconomic impacts of various forms of development, economic development in rural communities and resource development, and on Arctic coastal and offshore management and marine management, which ties into other work that you may hear about some later on climate change and other concerns about managing our resources to both to benefit people and to protect the environment. As many of you know, fisheries has been a long time research area that ISER has been involved with, primarily through our colleague Gunnar Knapp, who's on sabbatical this year, writing a book about the fisheries industry, which he hopes will be used in courses here and elsewhere. We've been involved in a variety of studies on the markets for different fisheries products, on commercial fishing safety, on the changes in the permitting process and what the impact of that is on local fishermen, on the impact of changes in the fisheries industry on the coast communities, and doing a lot of interaction with communities, especially in the Dillingham area, but others in fisheries. And so fisheries and natural resources is an area that we will continue to be involved in. And maybe we'll be doing a study of what happens to our Asian markets for fisheries this year, since that sounds like it's a very current concern. We also do a lot of work in research that involves the Arctic, not only Alaska, but across the Arctic with colleagues in other Arctic nations. And these are just a couple of examples, one on migration in the circumpolar north and people moving from small communities to larger ones, and looking for different types of work and staying and also trying to retain the cultural and economic basis of their communities. Also on social indicators, a lot of data on what do we know about people in the Arctic, and a new project sponsored by the Arctic Council is just about to kick off this year that will involve ISER and other American researchers collaborating with researchers from Iceland, Canada, and other parts of the Arctic to update this information. And I should point out, many I'm sure of you have heard that our outgoing Chancellor, Fran Ulmer, has just been appointed as chairman of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission. She will also maintain and retain her affiliation with ISER, so we will have a lot of very strong connections, I think, to people in the U.S. and elsewhere concerned about the Arctic. I'd like to turn it over now to Scott Goldsmith, who will talk to you about our work in various branches of economics.